Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about literally everything under the sun related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I have to say, y'all, we had some lovely tech challenges right at the start here, and we were joking as two tech CEOs about our love-hate relationship with technology. So I want to do a quick visual description. I am a white woman with mid-length, kind of wavy red hair. I'm wearing a cream-colored shirt with a maroon and kind of gold stripe white. Sitting in my dining room, y'all, because my basement is flooded. So behind me, I'm trying to go with a Zen look with to channel that right now. I've got a fountain, some plants, a maroon wall, and some art. I am super excited this week to be talking about wellness and DEIB with Jenna Anderson, who's the CEO of Access Elite. Jenna, introduce yourself. And I can't wait to dig into this conversation because the moment you and I met, we went deep on this topic.
Oh my gosh, I know, Mo. I could go on and on. I'm Jenna Anderson. I am the proud mother of three awesome little girls. I happen to be the CEO of Access Elite, and we are championing DEIB inclusion in all workplaces and really total well-being for employers and employees. I am passionate about creating happy, healthy places for everyone to work and excited to have this conversation with you today.
You know, when you and I, we were connected by a mutual acquaintance who just said, oh my gosh, you two need to meet because what you're doing is so similar. Excuse me. And the way you approach this work is so similar. So, you know, we go really deep with everyday inclusion on inclusion and belonging. And I love what you all are doing around total well-being with DEIB being a part of that. Let's talk about how those play together.
Yeah, we've been working with corporations of all shapes and sizes across the US for about 2 years. And, initially they came to us and said, how do we create a well culture? How do we create a workplace where people are healthy and they're taking care of themselves? And initially they were looking at well-being as one bucket and then DEIB as one bucket. And what we quickly said is, if you truly have a healthy culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are part of every aspect of it. They're part of the well-being programming. They're part of the mental health coaching. They're part of even physical fitness. Because if you're truly going to be inclusive, physical fitness has to adapt to the needs of every employee. So if you're thinking about that through that lens, you see it as one comprehensive solution. Yeah. And that's really what we do, which is why we have 850 providers on all 7 continents. Because if we're going to talk about mental health or physical health or emotional health, we need to do so with a diverse lens in mind, and create a place where people want to show up and work because they feel like it's speaking to them. And, a great example of that would be, we did a really fun Bollywood dance class for Diwali last year. And the idea was get up, get moving, learn something new. But what stuck out to me as an employee posted in the chat, they said, never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would see my peers across the country getting up and dancing Bollywood with me. It completely, it gave that individual goosebumps and made them feel like they truly belonged at that organization. Yep. Because they were being represented. And I think that is really, really crucial. So when we look at physical fitness and we look at mental health programming and even, meditation and cooking and art classes, we want everything we do to be representative of the full culture. And so you start to see DEIB, be part of everything that company does, and it really does move the culture forward.
Yeah, we talk about how it has to be woven into literally everything, right? Literally everything that you do, and I loved that example where somebody's saying, oh my gosh, like in my wildest dreams, I could not imagine this. I think, for example, talking about physical fitness, many people know that my daughter was a Paralympian. And, it was interesting because she also swam not just for Team USA, but she swam for University of California, San Diego. And it was and other other teams where she was the only disabled swimmer. And she would have to do the modifications. She would have to do the things versus the coaches knowing what to do, having some things in place. And so I think it's really interesting. That's just another example of one size does not fit all. And particularly when we're talking about wellness and well-being, and I want to dig into all the aspects of that, because you mentioned a couple. It's been really whitewashed. Really, right? The wellness machine has been whitewashed and is so not inclusive. So I am so thrilled that you all are so intentional about this and really understand this approach and how important it is.
100%. And, I think not only do you need to see people that look like you, that have similar backgrounds to you, educating, teaching, advocating, but you also need to see different approaches. It's not just a tactical learning, okay, as a perfect example, I am neurodiverse. I'm dyslexic. And, most of the time when you speak about neurodiversity, you speak about it tactically, like they need extra time for this, or they need this accommodation, but you don't speak to it on an emotional level where individuals can connect. And that is truly what gives people a sense of belonging. You know me, not my attribute or my difference, but you know me as an individual. And that's a lot of how this works into the education, the programming is create emotional connections, create opportunities for learning and advocacy. And you have to do that with a diverse board in mind as well. I think you hit on it. Whitewashed. I'm a white woman. I only have one singular perspective of the world given my background. So there's absolutely no way that as a leader of my organization, we could create diverse education and programming if I was the sole driver of that. So it's also crucial to have a broad aspect of educators, advisors, and team members to drive that programming forward.
Yeah, I think that's, that whole idea of who's at the table, because who's at the table is, or even just like who's shopping, who's in the kitchen, who's at the table, right, will impact all along the way. So as you're thinking about product, as you're thinking about service, as you're thinking about your workplace culture, how are you integrating every single voice into that in a way that they also feel like they can be heard, right, and listened to. So let's talk about all these, when we talk about well-being and when we talk about wellness, so many different dimensions. Speak a little bit to that, if you would, Jenna, because I love how 360 you all think about this.
Yeah. So historically, I think when companies thought about well-being, they would be like, okay, we have a STEPS program, or we have gym on campus, or my favorite is we have snacks in the kitchen, which is somewhat irrelevant now because we're hybrid in most cases. And what we quickly came in and said, well, it's not just the steps you take or the snacks you have in the kitchen, because you're only hitting on two dimensions. When you look at well-being, it's really physical, mental, emotional, and social. And under physical, that really is hitting nutrition and fitness. So essentially, you're only hitting one dimension of that. Whereas we come in and we say a true well-being program hits all dimensions. And it also doesn't force an individual down a certain path. So if you talk to a company before and they said, oh, we want to do a corporate challenge, we want to get everybody together and get them moving. And they'd go, it's going to be steps or it's going to be fitness. Well, you've now cut out probably 90% of your employee population who frankly doesn't need to take steps today. You know what? They may need to work on managing their stress and anxiety. Yep. They may need to meditate. They may need to simply learn a new skill, like take a art class to make them feel well. So when we work with companies, the goal is 20 minutes a day of self-care directed by the individual and creating the framework and foundation to give them everything they need for those minimum 20 minutes a day of self-care. Ideally, it's far more, but you got to start somewhere. And, we create that framework so they can come in and they can say, today it's this. Later on, it might be that. And they're rewarded and granted that time, which I think a lot of us need to say, I have that. I even though you do, you need to have somebody say, I'm giving you permission to take care of yourself in the best way you need to today. And that there's a framework that's diverse in nature to connect with the right content.
Well, and I think there's again, when we talk about how so much of what this looks like has been whitewashed, what I need to be well, if I am a single mom in an urban area, living in an apartment with, right, looks really different than me at, empty nest. I can walk out my door and be in nature practically. And I think there's this idea too. I often talk this morning time, which for so many people sets the tone for the day. It's not go out and train for a marathon. It is spend even, and sometimes you might not even get the 20 minutes, but even if you're getting the 10 deep breaths,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I love that the goal is 20 minutes, because then I can aspire to that and I can work toward that and I can do that in a way that works for me. There are days that are chaos and there are days that are much easier. But if I'm saying 20 minutes, it's a little bit like we've done with the nudges in the app, right?
Yeah.
You have 3 minutes or you have 30 seconds, right? So instead of it feeling so big and so prescriptive, like this is what wellness looks like and you should be doing these things.
Yeah.
Giving, so y'all, as you're thinking about this and thinking about how to create this wellness and well-being in your cultures, let people understand and know that it isn't training for a marathon. It's aspiring to 20 minutes a day, right? And it's
100%.
doing what works for you. It might be turning on a fountain or taking deep breaths or reading a book or just closing the bedroom door and spending some time, right, just in silence for 10 minutes that you usually don't get.
Well, and I think it's acknowledging, and also tracking it for yourself too, because sometimes we don't even know, like, how did I do this week? Was I true to myself? Did I give myself, whether it's 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes? Because you can set your own goals and we're all in different stages of life. I have 3 kids. I can get 20 minutes. That's amazing.
Right.
And, I think the other factor is a lot of companies have just said, I'm going to throw so much stuff at you. I'm going to give you this program and this program and this program. And now all of a sudden you have 20 programs. You don't know where to go. It's completely overwhelming. And frankly, they're dictating to the employee versus the employee telling them what they need.
Yeah.
And I think, well-being is an individual, personal thing. The goal of a company and a culture is to create the foundation that we are taking care of you, we are honoring you and your needs, and creating the space for you to learn and grow. We're not telling you need to meditate, you need to work out, you need to eat healthy. What we're saying is you need to be good to yourself. And whatever that looks like for you today, we're going to honor and recognize that and give you the tools and resources to help you get there. And I think that's the shift. And a lot of it's been driven by the great divide or the great resignation or the great shift. I love all these words, but frankly, it's people rising up saying, I want more. Mm-hmm. I want a better quality of life. I want better balance. I don't want to be as stressed out anymore. COVID taught me life is short. And so I'm going to reach out for what I want. And I think employers are taking notice and they're trying to move in that direction. But, it's interesting, Mo, we talked about it, I think earlier, everybody's looking for the easy button. And I think it's really, really important to talk to people in all facets, well-being and DEIB, that there isn't a fix, a solve, an easy button.
No silver bullet, no
No.
easy button, and you're never there.
You aren't. It's a forever journey, just like growing in life is. You never reach that pinnacle in life where you go, I have achieved, I am done growing, I'm a new person. It's the same thing with culture and striving to have an inclusive and diverse culture. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't solve the problem, you don't fix it. What I talk to employers and universities about is you put a stake in the ground. You say, this is where we are today, and this is how we want to grow and improve. Yep. And then you continually evaluate to make sure you're moving in the right direction at a pace that is appropriate. But you never stop. It's not like next year you're going to say, oh, the DEIB department, we don't need that anymore. We're good.
Right. And I think what's interesting, at Moxie, Andrea Di Matteo is really pays attention to our culture, right? And we're having conversations all the time that Drea is leading around what are some of the norms? What are some of the things? And, we drink, we practice what we preach in terms of the app, and, we go through and we work through nudges and have conversations together. We're a small organization. I think the other thing for people to understand with this in terms of the journey and the fix is you have to give your leaders the tools to be having these conversations with their teams, because there's no one corporate culture. There's what you're aspiring to. And then what does that look like especially for bigger organizations? What does wellness look like? Not just across your organization. What are you saying is important? But what does it look like in those pockets, that are really team leaders and the conversations that they're having? And, if me saying, Jenna, your well-being matters to me. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you being kind to yourself? What have you done? Getting in conversation and learning for you what that looks like too. Because I really want to double down on what you said in terms of this is not a one size fits all. And if you're taking that approach to well-being and to wellness, you're missing. You probably designed something that works for you and probably doesn't work for 90% of your organization.
Well, yeah, to your point, well-being, like anything, it's fluid. I tell people, I'm like, every day your culture changes. You hire a new person, somebody leaves, something in one of your individual employees' lives changes, depending upon size and shape of your company, will showcase how big of a change you're having with individual changes. But there's consistent changes always going on. So if your approach isn't fluid, then the outcome is not going to be effective.
Say that again, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, if your approach isn't fluid, the outcome will not be effective. I even say it's the little things, and you're always evolving. Like we try to do our best by our culture, but the other day I had an employee who wrote me this message and said, I really need to take tomorrow off. My kids are home. I'm a little stressed out about managing this. And she was apologizing. And I immediately responded to her and I said, first of all, you don't need to apologize for taking the time that is yours to take. And I said, secondly, it's yours, take it. Turn off your computer, enjoy your time with your kids. These are your days. Yep. But I think it speaks to that continuity of well-being is the programs you put in place, how you take care of your people, the culture you're curating, but then also how your leaders lead by example. I've made mistakes of saying I'm off today and then I'm responding to emails. Now I'm creating a precedent that my employees think a day off is not truly a day off. And so there's so many facets of creating a culture that you have to be looking at all dynamics when you're developing it and you're nurturing it.
If you had to, from what you've seen, what are maybe 2 or 3 pieces of or best practices that you've seen in terms of how individual leaders and how organizations can approach wellness and well-being?
Yeah. So one, you can't be afraid to ask what employees need. And I think a lot of times, you'll meet individuals and say, oh, I know what they need. They need this. And, my first response is, that's wonderful. I'm glad you're in tune with what your employees need, but would you be willing to ask them? And ask them genuinely with open-ended questions where they can truly express what they need. And the second thing is then be willing to be flexible in what you give them. Don't just check a box. I have a mental health program. I have a meditation program. I have a fitness program. We have an EAP. Wellness is done because it may not be. And in most cases, it isn't. It's continually evolving. And if you're not measuring it at a minimum every quarter, you're probably missing the mark.
Yes.
And, the third thing is don't look at, and it's the whole point of this conversation, don't look at DEIB and well-being as separate.
Right.
They are highly integrated. Every aspect of anything employee facing should have DEIB top of mind. It's not a department. It's not a tactic. It's a way of being within your organization. Yeah. So if you're siloing it, then you're potentially not being true to it. So in every aspect of what we do from a well-being program, we're looking at Are we meeting the needs of where your culture is and your employees are? And are we helping you grow to where you want to be? It's not just a fitness class. And I think that that's something, you know, that we are a bit unique in how we approach it. And it's super important to us.
I think loved all of that. there was so much to chew on just in those pieces of advice. I want to talk about one of the things and kind of dig in on something that you said in the first one. Excuse me, of course, I'm getting a tickle in my throat as we're chatting. And that was around measurement. So we have a lot of conversations with organizations where they're talking about they do this long form annual engagement survey. And it always gives me pause. And I'll oftentimes ask, how were you feeling 6 months ago? Or last month, how, right? It's like, this changes so quickly. It's like, you know, and then they're like, well, we're working through our data right now. That data is like, it's old, but like almost the immediate. So, you know, we have the pulse surveys that are very specific to the emotion of inclusion and belonging. And it's like, gosh, we recommend you do that quarterly and you understand in different parts of the organization. I love that y'all are doing the same thing. It's like data matters, and fresh and ongoing data matters, because even if we look at what's happening in the world and how that impacts people's wellness and well-being, we do not live in vacuums.
Yeah.
And so I love that you and I both really lean into this data and measurement piece too, because gosh, the annual engagement survey, I wish somebody would like just finally stick a fork in that thing and say you are spending so much money on something that is really not predictive of it's not current and it's not predictive.
Well, and I mean, nobody wants to take a survey over 10 questions. And so that's the other thing is you also have survey fatigue when you have such long drawn out surveys. The other factor too, is you have to measure what I say I do and what I actually do. Mm-hmm. And they're often very, very different. And your program has to take that into account. So simple example, I really want to do programming over lunch, you know, easy. Everybody loves lunch and learns. Now that we're hybrid, a lot of us work through lunch, not best choice.
Yeah.
But then you see an actual practicality, only 25% of people are attending over the lunch hour. Well, you have to look at that data side by side and say, okay, well, people said they wanted lunch, but they're actually not showing up. Is it that they don't like the content? Is it that they don't feel they have permission? Is it the lunch hour isn't good? And you need to alter the survey to tap into how are behaviors not, measuring up to what you said you were going to do. So There's a lot of data to look at. And if you're not looking at it, I mean, we analyze data on a monthly basis. We analyze data based upon what you said you were going to do, what you actually did, feedback, and then we make recommendations and we're constantly altering. You know, we're definitely one of those teams that comes in and says, let's have an annual plan, but let's be prepared to change it every month.
Every month.
Because, you know, the world is changing. There are so many factors at play. Your team is changing. So you need to be adaptive. And you need to have analytics top of mind. Otherwise, you're throwing money away. And that's what I tell companies. I was like, you are literally throwing money away. You have no idea what your return on investment is for this because you don't know how it's impacting people. And it doesn't mean that you're looking for dollar. I put a program into place. I saw a return and increase of sales as an example. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at dollar for dollar improvement in quality of life of your employees.
Yep.
Are they happier? Are they staying longer? Are they more productive? Are they less burned out? If those things are getting better and moving in the right direction, you're getting a positive ROI. If you don't know the answer to that question, then you're probably losing money.
Well, and I think there's this idea. So I4CP, they're a human capital research company, and they look at next practices. And next practices and the team, Madeline, I apologize that I can't remember the exact data. So Madeline and I have done a lot of work together, Madeline Borkin, and their next practices, it's essentially those companies that are outperforming, but I can't remember by how much, right? And what do those companies have in common? And one of the things that they have in common is a deep listening strategy, right? So they have this listening strategy. And I love, right, when what you and I are talking about is looking at data that is telling you how people are behaving. Are they doing things around wellness? Are they doing things around ongoing inclusive behaviors, wellness behaviors that will change culture, will change how they show up for each other, will change how they're showing up for themselves? And that is, you have to look at ongoing behavior and measure that ongoing behavior to get that. So not just the emotions, but also what are those behaviors that are going to lead to those outcomes?
100%. And, the cultures that create a space where people can also be honest and forthcoming.
Totally. Psychological safety.
It's so crucial, like never before. It's so interesting. You have to also see how much progress we've made. I mean, I won't speak for you, but when I entered the workforce, I feel like most of this was an afterthought. There was no psychological safety. There was little to no thought around diversity, equity, and inclusion. What Wellbeing, again, was snacks in the kitchen and maybe a gym that you could never go to. So we have made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
We still have a long way to go. But I think if you are at least having that conversation and thinking about, is this a safe place to share? Do we have a strategy? Are we recognizing it? And is it holistic in nature? You're making strides in the right direction. And it's exciting for me to see so many companies finally doing that.
That intentionality. Mm-hmm. Right? That this is a part of our strategy. This is a part of who we want to be. This is a part of, it's not an afterthought, or it's not even frowned upon, right? Because I think if you thought, right, that so much of this was seen as fluffy or ancillary or a sign of weakness, or, all kinds of just really interesting ways that people framed this up in their heads. And I agree, light years from even 5 years ago. So I knew this was going to be a great conversation. I love this sort of centering, measurement, thinking about this as really unique to each individual. Leave me with one last truth bomb, Jenna, about wellness and well-being and DEIB.
Only one.
Right?
I think that the biggest truth I would say is that leaders have to be on board. We've worked with a lot of companies, and with all due respect, if your CEO doesn't care, it doesn't matter how much your leadership team thinks about it, does about it, it won't work, because we all look up. We all look to our leader and we say, do they recognize and believe in this? Are they going to support my movement in this direction? And so I really challenge leaders to put their money where their mouth is, and not just with an investment, but with a time to say, like, I'm investing time. I'm leading by example. I'm doing 20 minutes of self-care a day, and then everybody else will follow behind that. And so it's really, we even look to leaders when we think about who we want to partner with. If you don't have a leadership culture that believes in this, we will not be successful long term. We may move the needle a little, we may do some cool stuff, but will we create substantial, sustainable change in that organization without leadership buy-in? Absolutely not. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is for people who are looking for companies that they want to work for, look at the top. What does the top look like? Are they big believers in it? Are they creating a culture? Are they walking the walk? Are they taking their weekends to be with their family? Because if not, that's going to be a trickle down effect. I always say to my team, after 6 o'clock, I'm not going to respond. I'm with my kids. On the weekends, I'm with my family. It doesn't mean I love my job any less, or that I'm less passionate about what I do. It's that my life and my kids will always come first.
Yep.
And I really encourage other leaders to think about that, because you're setting an example.
Love that. Oh my gosh, Jenna, thank you. Y'all go check out what they're up to at Access Elite. It's super cool. I got to do a really fun kind of behind the scenes with Jenna and her team. And just keep up the great work. The work matters. For all of you that are tuned in, just think about what you're doing. I love this, to model the way. I think that is a really good first step. And then to check in with your folks to say, how are you being kind to yourself? How are you caring for yourself? And how can I support that? So fantastic. Y'all, we will see you next week on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Jenna, thanks so much for sharing your brilliance.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everything you're doing to move the needle forward.
Cheers.